just to start, maybe I'll give a quick overview about who I am. So I see myself as a Venn diagram with 100% overlap between hydrogeology and engineering geology. And everything that we do is between fluid, solid, and discontinuous mechanics. And I think that is what gives us an advantage, because we've established ourselves in this field of science. Yeah, so it is something that we are a bit different to others with. So I'm also now the coordinator of the hydrogeology and engineering geology programs. Mampho, who's here, is also working with me. She'll tell you about that herself. Yeah, so for quick introductions, I'm going to hand over to Mampho and then to Duan. Yeah, then they can also introduce themselves and their backgrounds and why they're here.
Oh, I think you're on mute. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mampho Maoyi. I'm currently a lecturer at the University of Pretoria. I lecture rock mechanics, engineering geology. And Professor Dippenaar is my colleague, my friend, and my supervisor. So I started being part of this project during my master's, in which my MSc, I did geometric controls on partially saturated systems. And that is still also our research focus here at the university. So yeah, that's who I am in a nutshell. Duan, over to you.
Hello everyone, my name is Duan Swart. I'm an engineering geologist at Gage Consulting in Johannesburg. I'm currently working full-time and doing my doctoral thesis part-time at the University of Pretoria, like Matthys said, under Matthys. In that research, we are looking at the properties and behavior of variably saturated soils, or mainly saprolitic soils, grading in a silt fraction. And here we'll be looking at defining soil retention curves of in situ soils with a typical grading and structure intact, and then doing the same tests on soils with the same grading but with the structure broken down. And we'll be doing this for flow through the soil, permeabilities, kind of and then the unsaturated soil property functions of those. But me as a geologist, I do enjoy stopping at road cuts when driving down for holiday to the coast, much to the disappointment of my wife, as she only likes to stop for coffees, but I stop for soil and rock samples. So that's me.
Your kids do learn that from you, to drive past animals in the park. Okay, so I want to start today by saying what we are doing. So we all know the water cycle, and in that we all understand as general knowledge how surface water works and how groundwater works. We also have a fairly good established general knowledge about soil moisture and how that interacts with evaporation and transpiration. But everything in between that and the groundwater table is a black box. It is something that no one really spends a lot of time on. And it is something that is very easy to look at what goes in and what goes out, and to then assume conditions and things in between. So what we have then started doing is to look at variably saturated systems. So we then thought, okay, if we can look at the different parts of the system, we can understand what happens to a drop of water that lands on the Earth's surface and where it discharges either eventually on surface or into base flow into the aquifer. But it wasn't good enough anymore to just know that it happens or to know where it goes. But it became a matter of what is stored where, what is moved there, where we have suction, where that will divert flow in the system. So we started working towards the point where we actually wanted to know where a drop of water would end up and in what time, because that matters. So after we've now done some recap work on that, we decided, and Brendan Jones did this work together with Luke Brouwers, where they then, Brendan for his PhD and Luke for his master's, where they then looked at flow through fractures and went back to testing the cubic system under centrifugal acceleration to thicken the thickness, and then also just in normal models to understand how fractures flow. And Katlego, Segole, and Mampho, no, first Katlego, but then Mampho in the masters looked at the properties of discontinuity. So we moved into the fractured system, and Brendan looked at what happens at intersections in fractured systems, at changing moisture content, and also at the influences on the pressure and flow relationship between packet tests. Then we went into some then we first went into karst, and Duan did a lot of work there on what. We are also busy writing the groundwater project book on karst, so the terminology is fixed about what the sinkhole is and what is. But Duan contributed a lot of information that is now built into that terminology. And then he is now going on to the other complex soils that are silty saprolites, and I will hand over all of these to them. But so what's happening now is he looked at that soils, and parallel to that, Luke Brouwers did a master's that was on the soil rock interface. So he was looking at different inclinations and how water imbibed and entered those fracture systems at different water contents. So by that time, we've now established then the properties of the soil, the rock, the interface, assuming it would be abrupt, and then also the karst. Okay, so going on into the what, but also into the rock of karst, so we sit there with the interstitial porosity, which is the void space. We sit there with a fractured porosity, which is the secondary defects in our geological media, but specifically in rock. Tertiary or karstic porosity, which is a combination of the water movement underground and the landforms that form. So it's usually in limestones you would get primary porosity. In the dolomites, which have been dolomitized, you won't, but you'll get a lot of fracturing. So in all of them we can get fracturing as well. And then the karstic porosity is dissolution, which creates caves underground, which when they result in any change in land surface, we call it a sinkhole. Okay, then we started with applications on this, because what's now happening with Duan and Mampho and Yazid, who is also doing a PhD on this in terms of tracer work, we are looking at the use of different means to actually follow the particle and to understand what happens in the complex geological environment between the drop of water that falls on the surface and ends up flowing out somewhere. We just acquired a capillary pressure mercury system. It measures rock openings and connectivity at 2.7 nanometers. So we are busy building into that domain to look at that scale of influence. We got donated by Boson the infiltration table. When we started to work now into more the applications, Boson sponsored an infiltration table apparatus, which is 6x2 meters tilting table, on which we did experimental work for permeable pavements. The paper is out and it's being read. But the point is we can use that table for more complex other scientific means. So where we are now going, what we also then did beyond that was spend a lot of effort on cemeteries, and Yazid's paper on that is very close to publication because the movement of microbes and things like that also constitutes a trace. So it is something that has a different property to chemical traces and natural traces. So on our current project, we have 3 PhDs on this, which is Duan, Mampho, and Yazid. So the implications here is that after 10 years, we are now here. And I want to stop here now and hand over first to soil and then to rock. It makes sense to think that way. So you're welcome to throw questions in the Q&A, and then I hand over to Duan.
Yeah, Matthys, there's been a long road coming to this. I think the important thing about this book and just this project as a whole is that the Vadose Zone is a very important part for people in everyday life. You know, we walk on it, we grow our vegetables through it, and our houses are built in it. And the training that's currently being done at the university levels is classic, from my perspective as someone who's interested in soil, is classic soil mechanics, where it's usually saturated or completely dry, and it's based on mainly transported soil. So the reason for my area of study, and I think it's encapsulated well in this book, is looking at saprolitic soil, where it's on the border of rock and soil. It still has the rock structure, but it fails as a soil. And soils usually form problems when there's a change in moisture. And I think the book really shows that with the ground surface, we usually assume it's a zero moisture flux. But you know, we've seen in projects, and people see it over 10 years of experience in consulting, is that the ground surface is very important for, or what's happening at the ground surface is very important for what happens in the Vadose Zone, especially in the soils. And this is influenced by anthropogenic influences, climate cycles, weather cycles. You know, climate change is a big thing now, and it's important to always think about what will happen in the future after this structure or this project has been built. What will happen with the water? Because that's usually where the problems stem from. That's where the infrastructure money, the costs of repairing infrastructure comes in. It's just a simple change in moisture content. And I think that this book and this project as a whole looks at that and defines that quite well. I don't know if Mampho wants to carry on with the rocks.
Okay, so I completely agree with what Duan has said, but my area of speciality is looking at unsaturated rock fracture flow, which is equally important for the Vadose Zone. So basically the principles are the same, whereas he's looking at it from a soil perspective and I'm looking at it from fractured systems. So I'll make an example. Since where we are now, there are a lot of issues in terms of when you're working in quarries as to stormwater management, slope stability, you know, failures that could happen due to contact and rainfalls, etc. So this is where our research ties in well with the applications, because where we come from, as Professor Dippenaar has said, we started off with the parallel plate model, which Dr. Brendan Jones covered. And now as a department, we're increasing it to complex systems. And this is because research hasn't covered it that much. The reason is because rocks are heterogeneous, they're anisotropic, you know, there are so many parameters to consider when you're looking at just the rock. So we started understanding the flow mechanisms, and then we moved to actual systems that we're using now, the rocks, with the complexity. And now we're trying to understand what happens. So we already have another paper on the geometric controls, what happens when you look at roughness, etc. And now we're building it more to a field scale, because we've done the field, we've done the lab tests, and now we want to understand what happens in the field. So this, how we going to actually marry this is myself and Yazid, who's also here. He's looking at the contaminants, the traces, artificial traces, and the environmental traces. Then he'll be able to tell us information as to what happens now when we move to the rock mass characterization, which is something that I'm mostly interested in. So this book, I think, yeah, it covers well the principles of flow through fractured systems, and also then, paves a good way for those who are trying to understand the unsaturated system. As Duan has said, most people actually do not consider it. It's either it's dry or it's wet. And it also paves the way for our new research, which is myself, Duane, and Yazid, and Professor Dippenaar as the project leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Mampho. So what this book has established is that during 10 years, it compiled a book with new knowledge, and that new knowledge is all from or derived from UP through the WRC funding. The entire book is at that level where our research redefined international knowledge, and I'm now addressing questions from the Q&A, and I'm going to read them. I believe the handbook is quite multidisciplinary. What sectors are you hoping or expect it will take up into the shared book? Will it be most useful to? The thing is, our entire existence is on geology, and our entire existence is on the water cycle. And the minority of all that water is combined in the atmosphere and on surface, and groundwater constitutes 30% of the planet's water that we can use, and pretty much everything that is terrestrial that we can use. And yet we build dams and we look at, let's estimate recharge. We are giving up almost the entire water budget by guessing what happens in the Vadose Zone. So this book will change everything. It will change how we do everything. It will change how we understand everything, and it will be done so internationally because the world hasn't seen this. We did, and that is the second question. We have now been undertaking research on the Vadose Zone for at least 10 years. Where would you say we are in terms of our knowledge base compared internationally? John Cherry, when I started working with them on their creative content editor, so I do all the visuals. And he said he remembers when he saw us first that this is what we are about. And he used a word that I can't remember, but the point is, locally and globally, we are established as the leaders on the research front of variably saturated systems. Before everything, in one sentence, that is where we stand. Yeah, so above that, okay, that's the only questions in the Q&A. So if anyone has questions, you're welcome to ask, and I will continue. And how we put this is we wrote a book, and we decided on a book rather than a technical manual. And from the inception of this project, we've used the model of writing a usable book with a pretty cover and a number that you can download for free from the WRC, and papers. So all my students can tell you that this is being used for that. If you can't publish something and give PhDs, then the research isn't what it should be. Then there's a gap in the knowledge that you build, because you don't educate, you don't train, you don't disperse that information, and you don't prove you don't spread your knowledge and your acceptance by the international community. So writing a technical report or a blue book only is not helping. Going to a congress don't help anyone. the PhD students do between 3 and 8 papers that they do on their PhD work. See, no one of them are even grinning. That's the type of things that you do. So we verified everything that we do. Okay, regarding the availability of the book, today is the launch of the book, so you can run through WRC. Follow the digital rule of ethics. Give people the link to the WRC, not the shortcut to the PDF and not the PDF. Okay, so tell them it's on the WRC side, because that is how you validate the source of this information. Yeah, okay. Anything else in the Q&A? Otherwise, I'll hand over to Duan and Mampho again to say what they are busy going forward. Mampho, you're here. Duan, you're here. Let's start with Duan again. The soil should go first, and tell us what next.
Well, just to say, rocks were here before the soil. So, so what's next for me is looking at, as I said earlier, the classic soil mechanics is based on transport materials, and we looking at saprolytic soil, which is a residuum of rock. So it has the structures of the rock in and other structures, and it has a vertical and isotropy and isotropicity of density, porosity, and permeability, and we kind of trying to encapsulate that in various tests. For me, my next step is to look at the flow through the material with the structure intact and the structure broken down at similar densities, if we can get them at the same densities. Then also to look at using a row cell to predict the unsaturated permeabilities at varying suctions. So that's kind of where we are now. Which I would like to address at some point, which is a question in the Q&A, where it says, I worked on the interactions of ecosystems, primarily vegetation, with the Vadose Zone through the root system, which are typically much deeper than people think. Do you address this component? Not sure I 100% understand the question. Matthys, do you?
There we go. Okay, so the question is, I worked on the interactions of ecosystems, primarily. Okay, wait, let's first, is there one for you? Okay, so the first one is through the root systems, which are typically much deeper than people think. Do you address this component? So the answer is, that is one, yeah. I think you can answer that. So it's basically the classical view of soil science, to work with evapotranspiration and those things. I think that's the question. Yeah. You also asked another question of that. An important component of the water fluxes in the Vadose Zone is preferential flow, interflow, and hydrological terminology. These processes play an important role in recharge to recover them. So you can address that because you know what's in the book.
Yeah, so for the first question, we do address evapotranspiration and movement of water out of the ground surface. So we do look at that, but I would like to look at how the root system the soil there's a book that was written, Slow Plant Soil, I think it's the book name, Interactions. And that's typically kind of the direction I would like to go into. And then the second question, these processes play important. Yes, that the book, this is all in the book, it's all covered in the book, the questions that have been asked. Mampho, do you want to carry on?
Yes. So where I currently am, we busy doing some field work. As I've said, as part of my MSc, I did a lot of the lab work. So now we're moving on doing field verification tests. So the first step, actually the approach to this is, the whole idea was, let's do the applications that are used in industry, so that people can relate to the work that we will publish. So the first step now, what we're doing is understanding the rock mass characterization. So this is using photogrammetry and other techniques that are there. And then the flow visualizations, which I have done the flow observations from the lab, and now I'll be comparing it with what I get in the field. And the field work, which is the hydrogeology section, will be covered by Yazid, as I've said before, because then he will be looking at the tracer work, which can give us better results as just compared to me just understanding the unsaturated flow, because he's a hydrogeologist. So that's where we are. And so we want to actually compare about three sites, different geologies, and try to find out exactly what happens. Because also in my MSc, I used 2 different samples, which I had a quartzite and a shale. And now we're looking at 2 complex geologies, and we will compare the 2 and then, yeah, and have certain results. So yeah, that's where we are currently.
So there you have it in a nutshell. We are extremely proud of our work, and we put in a lot of effort to push it into the public domain. We contribute to community development and socio-economic implementation because science is the foundation of living, of understanding, of general knowledge, of living well, living healthy. Yeah, so I want to read Lani's out loud. Congrats to the team on this fantastic product. Wish you great success. And if we all implement it, I think we can say well done South Africa as well for the facility that the Water Research Commission is providing to do this level of research. It's not something that is in the entire world. Things like the groundwater project do find it. The planet is writing free groundwater textbooks. My function is to design figures that have never been made, that quality of things. So yeah, just on this, we are excellent at what we do, and water is a South African strength, not just ours. I know you will use this book. I know you will like this book. And thank you for joining us.